The rain came down in quiet sheets that Tuesday afternoon, blurring the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Orion Group's 14th floor cafeteria. Lena Hartwell sat alone at a corner table, her lunch untouched, her eyes fixed on the condensation sliding down her water glass. 3 weeks into her new job, 3 weeks of polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. 3 weeks of eating alone while the rest of the department clustered in groups she hadn't been invited to join. She was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Then a small hand touched the back of the chair across from her. Lena looked up. A little girl, no older than 6, maybe 7, stood there in a yellow dress, clutching the straps of a backpack shaped like a white rabbit. Her eyes were serious, careful, as if she already understood that asking for things sometimes meant being told no. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. Lena smiled before she even had time to think about it. "Of course you can," she said. She had no idea that the little girl's father was the most powerful man in the building, and she had no idea that this one small moment, a corner table, a rainy afternoon, a question asked in a quiet voice, was about to change 3 lives completely. Lena Hartwell had driven 14 hours to get here, not all at once. She'd stopped twice, slept in a motel outside of Columbus that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. But the drive itself had felt like one continuous act of leaving behind the apartment she'd shared with her college roommate for 4 years, leaving behind the small graphic design firm where she'd worked since graduation, comfortable and unremarkable, designing logos for dental offices and local restaurants, leaving behind the version of herself who had been content with small and unremarkable. She had applied to Orion Group on a whim, or what felt like a whim, though she'd spent 3 evenings rewriting her portfolio before she submitted it. Orion was a media and brand development company with offices in 7 cities. Their in-house creative department had a reputation for ambitious, exacting work. Their campaigns were the kind that ended up being discussed in industry circles, dissected in design school classrooms, held up as examples of what was possible when a team was given both resources and nerve. When Lena had first come across their work 3 years earlier, she had saved the entire archive to a folder on her laptop and visited it periodically, the way other people visited art museums, to remind herself that this level of care was achievable, even if she wasn't achieving it yet. When the offer came, Lena had sat very still in her kitchen for a long time, reading the email 3 times before she typed her acceptance. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now she was here in a city she barely knew, in an apartment still full of boxes she hadn't found the energy to unpack, working a job that had turned out to be considerably more complicated than the job description suggested, not in scope, but in the human architecture of it, the politics, the unspoken rules about who spoke in which meetings and who deferred to whom, and which client accounts carried prestige, and which were considered punishments. The creative department at Orion Group was a well-oiled machine that had been running long before Lena arrived and had no obvious interest in adjusting its gears to accommodate her. Her direct manager, a precise woman named Claire Whitfield, had shown Lena to her desk on the first morning, handed her a stack of brand guidelines and internal documentation and said, "Read these. Ask me questions if you need to, but try not to need to." Then she had disappeared into a glass-walled conference room, and Lena had not spoken to her again for 2 days. Her colleagues were not unfriendly exactly. They were simply occupied. They had existing rhythms, existing jokes, existing shorthand. There was a woman named Tara who kept a candy bowl on her desk and was clearly the social center of the department. People stopped by her desk the way people in old movies stopped by the corner diner, and Tara always had something to say that made them leave looking lighter. There was a senior designer named Brett, who was obviously brilliant and obviously knew it, and who reviewed Lena's first submitted deck with the particular care of someone who enjoys finding errors. There was a quiet man called Owen who worked at the far end of the room and ate lunch at his desk every single day, and who Lena had decided privately was probably the most interesting person in the building and simply didn't feel the need to demonstrate it. When Lena sat in on her first team meeting, the conversation moved so quickly, references she didn't recognize, client names she hadn't learned yet, an ongoing dispute about some color palette that apparently carried emotional weight she couldn't fathom, that she had filled an entire page of her notebook with questions she was afraid to ask. The cafeteria on the 14th floor was the one place she felt genuinely invisible rather than merely overlooked, which she was beginning to prefer. She could sit at her corner table with her salad and her phone and not have to perform the effort of belonging. She could simply be a woman eating lunch, which required nothing of her. It was a large cafeteria for a corporate space. Orion occupied the top 8 floors of a building that also housed 2 other companies, and the cafeteria served all 3. There were good windows, a real espresso machine, a section of plants that someone clearly cared for. It should have felt welcoming on most days. For most people, it probably did. For Lena, in the 3rd week of her new life, it was simply the place she ate alone and tried not to make eye contact with anyone who might feel obligated to come over. Except that on her 3rd Tuesday, she forgot her phone at her desk, and without the prop of it, the solitude felt less like privacy and more like what it actually was. A woman in a corner waiting for the world to make room for her, not entirely sure it would. She was watching the rain slide down the glass when she heard the small sound, the scrape of a chair, and looked up. The little girl was already there. The backpack was the first thing Lena really saw. It was shaped like a white rabbit, a proper stuffed animal shape, not just a print, with long, floppy ears and a small embroidered pink nose. It was the kind of thing a child picked out herself with absolute conviction in the middle of a store while a parent waited. Lena knew this because she had once been that child with a backpack shaped like a ladybug that she had refused to replace until the zipper broke. "Of course you can," Lena said, and the little girl set her backpack carefully on the table and climbed into the chair with the focused efficiency of someone who had climbed many chairs. She was small for what Lena guessed was her age, 6 or 7, with warm brown skin and dark coils gathered into 2 slightly uneven puff ponytails that suggested they had been done by someone trying their best, but not entirely sure what they were doing. Her dress was yellow with small white dots. She had a small scratch on her left knee that was in the late stages of healing. She looked at Lena with direct assessing eyes. "Are you new?" she asked. "I am," Lena said. "I've been here about 3 weeks." The girl considered this. "My name is Nia." "I'm Lena." Nia nodded, apparently satisfied with this exchange. She unzipped her rabbit backpack and produced a small container of crackers with geometric precision. "I have to wait here because my dad is working late," she said by way of explanation. "Sometimes I wait in his office, but it's boring in there. The chairs are too big." "That's fair," Lena said. "The chairs in the big offices are designed for looking impressive, not for actually sitting in." Nia looked at her with sudden, pleased surprise, the expression of a child who has said something and been taken seriously. "That's exactly what they are," she said firmly. "Impressive chairs." They ate in companionable quiet for a moment. Lena found herself eating her actual lunch, which she hadn't really been doing before Nia sat down. There was something about the matter-of-fact presence of the girl, the way she ate her crackers methodically, examining each one before she bit it, that made the table feel inhabited rather than empty. "What do you like?" Lena asked. It was the question she always asked children because it was the right question. Not what grade are you in, not what do you want to be when you grow up, but what do you like right now. Today Nia didn't hesitate. Drawing, strawberry cake, books about animals. She paused. Not broccoli. Lena laughed. A real laugh surprised out of her. "What did broccoli ever do to you?" "It tastes like the outside," Nia said with great seriousness. "The outside," Lena repeated. "Like grass, like fresh air." Nia pointed at her. "Exactly like that. I don't want to eat the outside." Lena was still smiling when she became aware, at the far edge of her vision, of someone standing near the cafeteria entrance. She didn't look directly at him, but she felt, in the particular way that you sometimes feel observed, the weight of someone's attention. When she finally glanced over, the doorway was empty. She turned back to Nia. The girl had produced a small notebook from her backpack and was showing Lena a drawing, a house with enormous windows and a garden full of animals she had drawn with careful attention to each species. "The giraffe lives next door," Nia explained, pointing. "Of course he does," Lena agreed. His name was Malcolm Bennett, and he was, by most measurable metrics, not a man who stood in doorways watching things. He made decisions. He held meetings that ran exactly as long as they needed to, and not a minute longer. He had restructured the company's entire brand licensing division in 18 months and been written about in 2 industry publications for doing so. His assistant Marcus kept a calendar so precisely managed that it included travel time between floors and accounted for the particular efficiency of using the service elevator versus the main bank when crossing the building. He did not stand in doorways. He did not watch. He was, in the culture of the company he ran, understood to be demanding and fair in equal measure, a combination that most people found more sustainable than the alternatives. He remembered the names of people who had been with the company for years. He attended the funerals of employees' parents when he could. He sent handwritten notes, not because it was a strategy, but because his own mother had always done it, and he had absorbed the belief that a handwritten sentence conveyed something a typed one couldn't. He was also, when a project was failing, capable of a directness so clean and unapologetic that it had made grown men go pale. He had been described by a journalist who had interviewed him for a profile he'd agreed to reluctantly as a man who has decided exactly who he is and is therefore very difficult to manage. The journalist had meant it as a mild criticism. Malcolm had kept the quote in a drawer. He was 38 years old. He had been running Orion Group for 6 years, since his mentor and the company's founder, Gerald Park, had retired and handed him the reins with the words, "Don't make it into something it isn't. It's already good. Just make it better." He had, to the best of his ability, tried to honor that. He was, in the parts of his life visible to the professional world, a competent and self-possessed man. In the parts of his life that were not visible, he was a black single dad doing his best, which was the most uncertain thing he had ever been, except that he had seen Nia walk toward the corner table. He'd been following her at a distance because 6-year-olds in office buildings required monitoring regardless of how independent they believed themselves to be. And then he had stopped because Nia had asked to sit down. This was not on its face a remarkable thing. Children asked to sit down, but Nia had not asked to sit anywhere near a stranger in almost 2 years. Since her mother died, the instinct had simply gone out of her. The ease of approach, the willingness to enter someone else's space without knowing what she'd find there. At school, her teacher had mentioned it in careful language at the parent-teacher conference, using phrases like tends towards solitary play and may benefit from structured social activities, which were the professional vocabulary for something Malcolm understood more plainly. His daughter was protecting herself against further losses by simply not attaching to new things. He didn't push. He had learned in the difficult first year of grief that pushing produced nothing good. He simply tried to make sure she was warm and fed, and that someone read to her at night, and that she knew she was loved, which he told her directly and without embarrassment every single day because his own father had never said it. And he had decided early on that this would not be his inheritance to pass on. He had watched Nia move through the world these last 2 years with a kind of aching respect. She was braver than she knew. She got up every morning and put on her shoes and went to school and did her work and drew her pictures and ate her dinner and asked for one more story at bedtime, and all of it was a form of courage she hadn't asked to need. He told her she was brave when she needed to hear it. He made sure she saw that he cried sometimes too, because a grief counselor had told him early on that hiding it would teach her to hide it, and he refused that lesson. But here was Nia sitting across from a young woman he didn't recognize, new to the department, judging by the ID badge, and she was talking, not performing, not enduring, talking. Her hands moved when she spoke, which they only did when she was genuinely engaged. She was showing the woman her notebook. The woman was leaning in to look. Malcolm stayed in the doorway for longer than he intended, long enough to see the woman laugh at something Nia said, long enough to see Nia point at something in the drawing with the authority of an artist explaining her work. Long enough to see the particular quality of the woman's attention, not performed, not the bright professional enthusiasm of someone aware they were being watched, but actual present listening. He left before either of them noticed him. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a board meeting, but he found himself more than once thinking about the corner table, about the way Nia's hands had moved, about the laugh. When he picked her up from the cafeteria 2 hours later, she talked about Lena for the entire car ride home. She talked about her while they made dinner. She talked about the drawing lesson and the broccoli conversation and a theory Lena had offered about why juice tastes better in a box than in a glass, which Nia had accepted as scientific fact. She fell asleep mid-sentence, telling him about a giraffe that lived next door to a house with big windows. He lay awake that night thinking about what it meant, A child who had retreated from the world suddenly walking toward it again. What had made the difference? What the woman at the corner table had done, or said, or simply been. By morning he had made a decision. He would find out. The call came through at 10:15 the following morning. Lena was in the middle of reformatting a brand deck, a task that required the kind of focused tedium she had gotten good at sustaining through headphones and coffee. When her desk phone rang, the internal line, which she had used approximately twice, she answered it with her pen still in her hand. "This is Lena Hartwell. Miss Hartwell." The voice was measured, professionally neutral. "This is Marcus Reed, executive assistant to Malcolm Bennett. Mr. Bennett would like to speak with you at 11, if your schedule allows." Lena's pen went still. "I'm sorry, Malcolm Bennett." "Yes, ma'am." "The CEO." She said, "Yes, obviously." You did not say no to the CEO's calendar, but she spent the next 45 minutes in a quiet, controlled state of dread, cycling through everything she might have done wrong in 3 weeks. The revised Kellerman deck she'd submitted last Friday, had something been off? Had she copied the wrong person on an email? Had she somehow, in some way she couldn't identify, made an error visible enough to reach the 42nd floor? She straightened her jacket in the elevator mirror. She told herself she looked professional. She was not entirely convinced. Marcus met her at the elevator and walked her to the office with a small, reassuring nod that she clung to like driftwood. The office itself was large but not ostentatious. Clean lines, good light, a desk that was genuinely tidy rather than staged for appearances, bookshelves with actual books on them, one framed drawing on the wall near the window, a crayon house with enormous windows and a giraffe standing beside it. Lena recognized it immediately, and her anxiety shifted into something else, something softer and more confused. Malcolm Bennett was standing at the window when she entered. He turned, and she recognized him at once, the man in the cafeteria doorway. He was taller than he'd seemed at a distance. The stillness she'd noticed from across the room was not coldness. She realized now it was the particular quality of someone who paid close attention. A black man in a room built for authority, entirely at ease in it, his dark brown hands resting lightly against the back of the chair before he gestured for her to sit. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down, Miss Hartwell. Thank you for coming." His voice was not what she'd expected from the stories she'd heard about him. Clipped boardroom authority, the voice of a man who ended meetings by standing up. It was quieter than that, more careful. "Of course," she said. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. He looked at her for a moment, not appraisingly, not in the way that made her feel assessed, but in the way of someone choosing words. "I want to ask you something that may seem unusual," he said. "I'll explain the context so it doesn't catch you off guard." He paused. "What did you talk about with my daughter yesterday afternoon?" The dread evaporated. In its place came a rush of understanding that rearranged the entire morning. "Nia," she said. "The rabbit backpack. The giraffe. Your daughter." "Nia, yes." Lena thought about it honestly. "Broccoli," she said. "Mostly broccoli at first. And a drawing she showed me of a house with a lot of animals living nearby." She hesitated. "She's very serious about her art. She explained the whole neighborhood to me." Something moved across Malcolm Bennett's face. Not quite a smile, but the vicinity of one. "Yes," he said quietly. "She is." He did not tell her everything at once. He was not, she would come to understand later, a man who disclosed things quickly, but he told her enough. He told her that Nia's mother, her name had been Simone, had died 26 months ago from a sudden cardiac event. No warning. A Tuesday morning, the same as any other Tuesday, and then it was not. Nia had been 4, old enough to understand the permanent shape of the word gone, young enough that the edges of the memory would eventually blur in ways that were both merciful and terrible. In the months after, Nia had become very quiet, not sad in the dramatic, visible way. She didn't cry often, didn't throw tantrums, didn't act out in the ways the grief counselor had gently suggested were possible. She simply became careful, considered. She watched things rather than participating in them. She was kind and she was loved and she had her drawings and her books. And Malcolm had done everything he knew how to do and some things he hadn't known how to do until he had to. But she didn't walk toward people anymore, Malcolm said. He was looking at his hands, which were resting flat on the desk. Until yesterday. He looked up. His eyes were direct and clear and carried something in them that Lena recognized, not because she'd experienced exactly what he had, but because she had once sat with her own mother through a long illness and understood the particular exhaustion of loving someone you couldn't entirely protect. "I'm not sure I did anything remarkable," Lena said. "Honestly, I asked her what she liked. I took her drawing seriously." "I know," he said. "That's what she told me." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the whole of it, I think. She told me that you listened like she was interesting." Lena didn't know what to say to that. She felt the particular discomfort of receiving credit for something she hadn't intended as generosity. She had simply been a person at a table who found a child interesting because the child was interesting. She hadn't done anything strategic. She had just been present. "She is interesting," Lena said finally. "The giraffe next door is a compelling narrative choice." This time the smile came through fully. It changed his face in a way she hadn't anticipated, softened it, made it younger. He looked for a moment like a man who had recently remembered that smiling was available to him. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "and to make sure you understood that whatever you're doing, you don't need to stop." It was not a planned arrangement. On the following Thursday, Naya was in the cafeteria when Lena arrived for lunch. She had saved Lena's corner table, with her rabbit backpack placed on the chair like a small authoritative placeholder. She had also brought 2 juice boxes, one of which she pushed across the table toward Lena with the certainty of someone who has decided something. "Apple or grape?" Lena asked, examining them. "Both are apple," Nia said. "I don't like grape." "Then why offer me a choice?" Nia looked at her. "You could pretend one was grape if you wanted." Lena accepted the juice box. "Apple is better anyway." They ate together with the comfort of people who had already established the rules of their shared space. Naya brought her notebook and worked on a new drawing. She was currently focused on a detailed map of an imaginary city, while Lena ate and occasionally offered geographic input when asked. Should the library be near the park? Yes, obviously. What about the bakery close to the school so children could smell it during lessons and feel that the world was full of good things? It happened again the following week and the week after that. Some weeks, Nia wasn't there. Malcolm traveled occasionally, and on those trips, Nia stayed with her grandmother in the suburbs. But when she was in the building, she found Lena. She began bringing her drawings to show her. A horse in a field, the imaginary city with more detail, new buildings added. A portrait of Malcolm that captured with remarkable accuracy the particular expression he made when he was thinking hard about something. "Does he know you draw him?" Lena asked. "He hangs them up," Naya said simply. "He hangs up everything I make him." Lena thought about the framed crayon drawing in the CEO's office, the house with the enormous windows and the giraffe. "That's the right thing to do," she said. She helped Nia with homework twice when Nia had brought it with her and gotten stuck. Long addition both times, the particular challenge of carrying numbers, which Nia found philosophically suspect. "Why do the numbers have to go somewhere else?" she demanded. "Why can't they just stay where they are?" "That's actually a profound question," Lena told her. "You're asking about the nature of place value. I'm asking why math is difficult." Also valid. They worked through it together with colored pencils and a system Lena improvised, involving small drawings of people carrying boxes, which Nia approved of and which, crucially, actually worked. By the end, Nia could carry numbers with the confident authority of someone who had understood rather than merely memorized, which was the only kind of understanding that stuck. Malcolm, arriving to collect her that afternoon, found his daughter explaining long addition to an empty chair with a colored pencil and a notebook. He stood in the doorway, that doorway again, and watched. And Lena, gathering her things at the table nearby, looked up and found him watching, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "She's going to be a very good teacher someday," Lena said finally. "Or a mathematician," he said. "Both." He picked up Nia's notebook and looked at the drawings of people carrying boxes. Something in his expression was very careful and very full. "Thank you," he said, not for the first time. But this time it meant something different, wider, deeper, harder to contain in 2 words. She was aware in that moment of something shifting in the space between them. It wasn't dramatic. There were no declarations, no abrupt recognitions, nothing that would have made a person watching from outside understand what was changing. It was simply a man who had been holding himself at a certain careful distance from the world, looking at her across a cafeteria table for one unguarded moment, and the distance being just slightly less. She thought about it on the train home. She thought about the way he had said thank you and meant something it would have taken several more words to say accurately. She thought about the way he had held Nia's notebook, not casually. Not the way you hold a child's artwork because you are supposed to, but the way you hold something that matters to you. She thought about it and then put it away and didn't think about it again, or tried not to, because some things were better approached obliquely from the side. The way you look at something bright that you can't look at directly yet. She had not come to this city for this. She had come here for the work, for the chance to become better at something she cared about, for the version of herself that she had been trying to grow toward. Whatever this was, this man, this child, this corner table that had somehow become the most important 10 square FT of her week, it had not been in the plan. But then the best things usually weren't. It started, as these things usually did, with someone who had nothing to lose saying something to someone who had a little more, and from there it moved in the reliable, organic way of office rumors, finding the path of least resistance, widening at every turn. By the fourth week of Naya's cafeteria visits, people had noticed. Of course they had. The CEO's daughter choosing the same table, the same company, every time, it was visible. Offices were places built for noticing, and people who spent 8 or more hours inside them became very good at it. They noticed who arrived early and who left late. They noticed who received a direct email from the executive floor versus who heard things secondhand. They noticed whose desk had begun to acquire the small personal touches of a plant, a photograph, a favorite mug that signaled someone who had decided to stay, and whose desk remained bare in the particular way of someone still auditing whether they'd made the right choice. Lena's desk had one photograph and a small succulent she'd bought at the weekend market 3 blocks from her apartment. She was, the department had decided, probably staying. They had also noticed her corner table. They had noticed Nia. Lena first heard it secondhand from Priya, who said it carefully and with genuine apology in her voice. The voice of someone who is delivering information they wish they didn't have, and who has thought seriously about whether to say anything at all and concluded that not saying it would be a worse thing. I just thought you should know what people are saying, Priya said. They were in the small kitchen on the design floor, both making coffee with the focused attention that kitchen conversations often use as cover. What people were saying was that Lena had positioned herself strategically, that she had seen an opportunity, the boss's lonely kid, the soft entry point, and had taken it with deliberate calculation. That the warmth was a performance crafted and sustained, designed to produce proximity to power, that the corner table had been chosen on purpose. That the whole quiet, unassuming routine of it, the juice boxes, the homework help, the carefully attentive listening, was the most sophisticated kind of ambition because it looked nothing like ambition at all. In one version of the story, Lena had known from the start who Nia was. In another, she had done research before her first week. Priya said she didn't believe it. Her voice had the quality of someone who believed the structure of it, even if not the specific facts, who felt somewhere under her genuine goodwill toward Lena that there was something slightly convenient about the situation that bore at least a moment's examination. Lena sat with this for the rest of the afternoon. She sat with it through the evening in her apartment that was still not entirely unpacked. She thought about the first day, the rain, the empty table, the rabbit backpack. She thought about whether there had been anything strategic in her at that moment, any calculation, any awareness of who the building belonged to or who the child's father might be. She had not known. She had simply been a woman who had been lonely all day and was suddenly, unexpectedly, not. But the thinking itself felt dangerous. The moment she started examining the friendship through someone else's lens, everything began to look like it could be performance. A kind word becomes a strategy. A shared lunch becomes an investment. She looked at her own memory and found it suddenly difficult to trust, which was the most insidious thing about being accused of something. Not that others believed it, but that you began to wonder if you did. She made the decision not out of self-protection, or not entirely, but because she could not bear what the doubt was doing to something she valued. She would keep her distance, let the gossip expire, let Nia find other places to sit. It was the wrong decision, and she knew it the moment she made it. She knew it with the particular clarity that comes when you choose the path of least damage and understand, even as you're choosing it, that damage is not least but only different. She made it anyway because she was tired and far from home, and the world of this office still felt foreign, and she didn't have the resources that week to fight on every front. The next time Nia came to the cafeteria, Lena was there. She hadn't been able to bring herself to take lunch at her desk, which would have been a different kind of surrender, but she kept her eyes down when Nia scanned the room. She moved to a different table against the wall, opened her laptop, and made herself look absorbed, reviewed a deck she'd already reviewed, read the same paragraph 3 times. When Nia walked past, she placed her hand briefly on the back of the chair at Lena's new table. Just her hand, no words. Then she took it away and walked to the corner table alone and sat down and opened her notebook without looking up. Lena stared at her laptop screen and felt something settle in her chest like a stone. She did not go over. She sat there for the remaining 20 minutes of her lunch break and ate nothing and told herself she had done the right thing, which was the least convincing lie she had told herself in some time. Malcolm knew something was wrong before Nia said anything. He knew it the way parents learn to know things. Not from evidence exactly, but from the particular quality of silence around a child who is carrying something they don't know how to put down. She was quiet at dinner. She ate her food in the mechanical way she'd fallen into in the hard first year. Fork to plate, plate to mouth, chewing without tasting. He watched her over his own plate and waited because he had learned that the worst thing to do was ask too quickly. They were washing up together, Nia standing on her step stool to reach the sink, which she had insisted on for 2 years with absolute determination. When she said it, "Did I do something wrong to Lena?" He turned off the water. He set down the dish he was drying. "What happened?" he asked. He kept his voice level, careful, the way you approach something fragile. "She didn't sit with me." Nia's voice was small. She was still looking at the sink. She looked at her computer instead. She changed her table. She turned then and looked at him, and her eyes were wet but not yet spilling. "I thought I said something bad. I thought I was too much." Too much. The phrase landed in him like a weight. He recognized it. He had heard Simone say it about herself once, years ago, in a low moment. He still thought about the inheritance of that phrase in his daughter's mouth. It was not something he would accept. "You are not too much," he said. He crouched down to her level, which he always did when things were important. "Do you understand me? You are not too much." "Then why?" "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm going to find out, and it's not because of anything you did." He called Marcus that evening and had Lena Hartwell's schedule on his screen by 9 the following morning. He moved 2 meetings and canceled a call that Marcus documented with the diplomatic phrase "postponed" at Mr. Bennett's request. And at 11 he appeared at the door of the creative department and asked quietly for Miss Hartwell. She came to his office with the same careful composure she'd had the first time. She sat in the same chair, but this time she looked like someone braced for something, and he understood abruptly that she expected to be in trouble. "You've been avoiding Nia," he said, not accusingly, just as a fact. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes," she told him. She told him plainly and without self-pity, the rumors, the things people were saying, the logic she had followed. She told him she hadn't wanted to cause problems for the company or for him. She told him she thought distance was the cleaner choice. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for several seconds. "Nia asked me last night if she had said something wrong," he said. "She wondered if she was too much." The color changed in Lena's face. He saw the moment it landed. "She is 6 years old," he continued, "and she has been told by the world in various ways since she was 4 that she has lost something irreplaceable. She does not need the people she trusts to confirm that she is a burden." He paused. "You are not a burden either, for what it's worth. You are the reason my daughter is drawing maps of imaginary cities again." Lena looked at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "The people who said those things," he said, "are managing a situation they find threatening by reframing it as something cynical. That's a them problem." He leaned forward slightly. "Lena, you are the only person who has made my daughter feel like herself in 2 years. Please don't let someone else's interpretation of that take it away from her." Orion Group held its annual all-staff gathering in the ballroom of a hotel 12 blocks from the office. It was a formal affair by company tradition. Real tables, real flowers, assigned seating, and it served the dual function of celebrating the year's work and reminding everyone that they were part of something larger than their individual floors and departments. Lena had not particularly wanted to attend. She had a new dress and an old anxiety about rooms full of colleagues who knew each other better than they knew her. But she went because not going would have been noticed, and she had decided to stop managing herself based on what would be noticed. She found her name card at a table near the back. Priya was there, which helped, and settled in with a glass of water and the reasonable hope of getting through the evening without incident. Nia had not been mentioned in connection with the dinner. There was no reason for Malcolm's daughter to be at a company event. So when Lena felt a small hand close around two of her fingers somewhere between the salad course and the main, she turned in genuine surprise. Nia was standing beside her chair in a dark blue dress with small buttons down the front. Her curls were loose tonight, soft around her face, which made her look older and also younger simultaneously, the way children sometimes do when you see them dressed for an occasion. She was holding a folded piece of paper in her free hand. "What are you doing here?" Lena asked softly. "Dad said I could come for the first part," Nia said, "and I wanted to give you this." She held out the folded paper. Lena opened it. It was a drawing, careful, deliberate, rendered in the colored pencils Nia always carried. Two figures at a table, one large, one small. Between them, a juice box. In the corner of the drawing, a white rabbit backpack leaning against the table leg. Above it, in careful, uneven letters, "My friend Lena." Lena looked at the drawing for a long time. She became aware that she needed to take a breath. "It's beautiful," she said, and her voice was steady, which she was proud of. "I'm going to frame this like Dad does," Nia said, pleased. Exactly like that. The evening had been proceeding in its formal way around them, but now there was a stir at the front of the room. Lena looked up. Malcolm was at the microphone, thanking the assembled staff for the year's work in his usual, precise, unornamented way. He was a good speaker because he never oversold anything. And then, unexpectedly, he stopped mid-sentence. He was looking toward the back of the room, toward their table. Nia, who had been standing beside Lena's chair, apparently decided that this was the moment. She took Lena's hand more fully, all 5 fingers now deliberate, and began walking toward the front of the room. Lena followed because what else do you do when a 6-year-old decides something? The room went quiet in that particular way that rooms do when something unscripted is happening. Nia walked to the microphone with the focused confidence of someone who has made a decision and will not be talked out of it. She looked out at the assembled faces without apparent concern. "This is my friend Lena," she announced with the clear diction of a child who had been read to extensively and knew how to project. "She listens like you're interesting. I think everyone should have a friend who listens like that." She looked up at her father. There was a communication between them, small, wordless, the kind that accumulates between a parent and child over years of paying attention to each other. Malcolm stepped to the microphone. He looked at Lena for a long moment. The room waited. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Not loud enough for performance, exactly loud enough to be heard. "My daughter has better instincts than I do," he said. "She also has better timing." A small movement of breath through the room, not quite laughter, but its gentler cousin. "Lena," he stopped, tried again. "This year has been. I have learned that some things are worth saying plainly, rather than managing into safe language." He paused. The room was very still. "I'd like very much for you to be part of our family, if that's something you'd want." It was not a proposal in the formal sense. There was no ring, no bent knee. It was something quieter and more honest than that. A man who had spent 2 years being careful and self-contained, saying plainly and in front of people that he was done being careful about this particular thing. Lena stood in the front of a ballroom in a city she had driven 14 hours to reach, holding a colored pencil drawing of herself sitting at a corner table, and she looked at the man and the girl and felt something settle in her chest. That was the opposite of that stone from before. "Yes," she said, simply, without hedging. Nia pumped her small fist in a gesture of unmistakable victory. The engagement was not announced at the company dinner. Malcolm was, to no one's surprise, resistant to making personal things into institutional events. What happened at the dinner stayed at the dinner, managed by Marcus into the internal company narrative as a heartfelt moment, and left at that. The rumors did not expire so much as they transformed. The people who had been sharpest became, in the way of people who have been proven wrong about something they can't quite admit, simply quieter on the subject. Priya sent Lena a text the morning after the dinner that said, "For the record, I always knew." It was not entirely true, but Lena appreciated the spirit of it. The actual asking proper, private, with the ring his mother had offered and Nia sitting on the kitchen counter, eating cereal and supervising, happened on a Saturday morning in November, 3 months later. Malcolm had been building toward it for weeks with the same methodical care he brought to anything that mattered, which Lena found both funny and genuinely moving. He was not a man who winged things. He thought about how to do them right, and the thinking was visible to her now, in the way that people become visible to each other when they have decided to let that happen, in the careful way he cleared the morning, in the particular quality of his attention over the preceding days, in the small signs of preparation that she recognized as his version of tenderness. He got down on one knee on the kitchen floor, while Nia watched from the counter with cereal held suspended on her spoon. He said the things he meant in the plain language he always used for things that mattered. He said that he had not expected this. He said that he was grateful in ways he was still learning to articulate. He said that Nia had better judgment than he did, which they both already knew, and that he was therefore willing to defer to her recommendation in this, as in most things. He did it right. Nia's reaction was to climb off the counter, hug Lena very hard around the middle, and then immediately return to her cereal with the air of someone who has accomplished a long-standing objective. She had, it emerged, been conducting her own quiet campaign for several months. Malcolm discovered this in stages, a drawing she had made of 3 people in a house with big windows placed strategically on his nightstand. A question she had asked her grandmother about whether people could choose to be a family even if they didn't start out as one. A very direct conversation she'd apparently had with Marcus at the office about the general timeline of things. Marcus had told Malcolm about this conversation with the diplomatic neutrality of a man who has been asked to confirm something he was not going to deny. She was running her own operation, Lena said when Malcolm told her all this. She gets it from her mother, he said, and then paused. And Lena waited through the pause the way she had learned to, not filling it, not hurrying him past it, just being there on the other side of it when he came back. She had learned this about him in the months of building something together, that he needed room to carry the people he had lost alongside the life he was building now, and that the right kind of love made room rather than asking for the space to be cleared. Simone would have liked you, he said finally. She valued directness. She had no patience for people who said one thing and meant another. She would have liked that you told Nia the truth about broccoli instead of making her eat it anyway. What is the truth about broccoli? That it tastes like the outside. They both laughed. It was the kind of laughter that had weight in it as well as lightness. The kind you get when something is genuinely funny and also when you are simply glad to be where you are. The wedding was small by design and large in feeling. 40 people in the garden of a house they had rented for the occasion on a Saturday in late May, when the weather came through as advertised and the light was the particular gold of early evening that makes everything look the way people hope it will look in photographs. Lena wore a dress she had found with her mother, who had driven out for the week and spent the entire time crying at intervals and insisting she wasn't crying. Malcolm wore a suit he'd had made and a tie Nia had selected from 4 options with the gravity of a chief of staff making a consequential decision. She had studied all 4 for nearly 10 minutes, holding each against her father's jacket before pointing to a deep blue one and saying, "This one. It matches the important feeling." Malcolm had worn it without question. Nia wore a dress with flowers on it and carried a small basket of petals that she distributed with the focused generosity of someone who had been waiting for this specific role her whole short life. She did not throw them. She walked down the aisle before Lena and placed individual petals with considered care, looking up periodically to make sure they were landing correctly, moving with the deliberate precision of a person who understands that some moments deserve to be taken seriously and is prepared to take them seriously even if no one else will. "She's going to do this for 20 minutes, Malcolm said quietly, watching from the front. "Let her take her time," Lena said. He looked at her. "Let her take her time," she said again. "This is hers, too." He nodded. And they did. And Nia placed every petal she had, retracing her steps once to make sure she hadn't missed a section, and walked back up the aisle, and then came and stood between them at the front with the absolute certainty of someone who knows exactly where she belongs. She held Lena's hand on one side and Malcolm's on the other. She did not let go through the entire ceremony. In the evening, after the dinner and the small speeches, Lena's mother, briefly and tearfully, Malcolm's college friend, who had flown in from Portland and kept it to 2 minutes as requested, though 2 minutes was clearly insufficient, and everyone knew it. A short reading from Nia herself, a poem she had written about houses with big windows and gardens where giraffes could live, which she delivered with total composure, and which made more than one person need a moment. Malcolm stood with a glass of wine and said the thing he had been thinking about for months. A year before Nia was born, he said, "I would have told you that the things that mattered most were things you could measure. Results, outcomes, evidence of progress." He paused. "I have spent the last 3 years learning that the things that matter most are not measurable. They are a child who decides to walk toward a stranger at a table. They are a woman who makes room. They are the small moments that don't announce themselves as important and would be easy to miss if you were looking at your phone or thinking about the next thing." He looked at Lena. "I have been fortunate beyond what I deserve, and I am going to spend a long time trying to be worth it." Lena raised her glass. "You already are," she said. Nia, who had appeared silently beside Lena's chair at some point during the speech and had been listening with the careful attention she brought to things she considered important, tugged Lena's sleeve. "Can I have cake now?" she whispered. "Yes," Lena whispered back. "You can absolutely have cake." There is a drawing framed in the hallway of their house that Nia made when she was 6 years old. 2 figures at a table. Between them, a juice box. In the corner, a white rabbit backpack leaning against the table leg. Above it, in careful, uneven letters, "My friend Lena." Beside it, added later in the same colored pencils, a third figure, smaller, deliberately placed between the 2 larger ones. Her feet not quite reaching the floor the way Nia's feet rarely reached the floor at that age. She drew herself into the picture the week after the wedding. She showed it to Lena without ceremony, just climbed up on the kitchen stool, handed it over, and said, "I added me." Lena looked at the drawing for a long time. "It was always missing you," she said. Nia nodded, satisfied. She had known this. She had simply been waiting until it was official. She was, in this as in many things, a person who understood that the right time for something was not always the first available time, that some things needed their full distance to run before they arrived where they were going. Lena reframed the drawing that weekend, took it to a proper framing shop, picked out a frame that suited it, white, simple, the kind that makes the thing inside it look considered, and hung it back in the hallway where Malcolm passed it every morning on his way to the kitchen. He never said anything about the new frame. He didn't need to. She would sometimes catch him, pausing there, coffee in hand, looking at it for a moment before the day began. That was enough. More than enough. Some things are worth waiting for. Some things begin with a question asked in a quiet voice at a corner table on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A question with no strategy in it, no calculation, only the honest need of a small person looking for somewhere to belong, and the simple willingness of someone else to say, "Yes, sit here. There is room. The room we make for each other." That is where families begin, not in grand gestures or perfect timing, in the ordinary willingness to move over, to look up from whatever you are doing, to say yes to the next thing before you know what the next thing will ask of you, in the recognition that a stranger's face sometimes holds something you have been looking for, even when you didn't know you were looking. Nia knew before anyone. She had walked into a cafeteria on a rainy afternoon with her rabbit backpack in her careful eyes, and she had looked at a woman sitting alone in a corner, and she had walked toward her. She had not known why exactly. She would not have been able to explain it had anyone asked. She had simply known, in the way that children sometimes know things before the rest of the world catches up, that this was the right direction, that the woman at the corner table would make room. "Can I sit with you?" The answer, it turns out, can change everything.
How many people in power can read a room but still miss what a lonely child needs most? They whisper to protect their status, and they twist simple kindness to protect their pride. What would you have done in Lena's place when the rumors started? And have you ever seen a child tell the truth more clearly than any adult in the room? Subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the real receipt is a child's drawing that says, "My friend Lena." Because when you make room for a child instead of pushing them aside, you protect more than their feeling. You protect their sense of belonging.